Several years ago, I worked at a church, and it was a bigger church, but the lead pastor had decided he was going to resign, and he was going to go plant another church in Arkansas. It was exciting, and it was really interesting what he was wanting to do, and so we were all behind him in that. But therefore, the elders were looking for a new pastor. And I was the youth pastor there at the time, and some crazy things have happened in youth ministry in my time. And probably one of the top ones in my whole youth ministry career happened during that time. The elders were looking for a guy to replace our lead minister with, and I was on a Sunday morning. I was teaching our middle school boys Sunday school class. And I was teaching them, and one of the boys said that he was gonna turn in a resume for the job. And this guy wasn't known for being a real jokester, but it caught me as funny, and I just thought, man, that is hilarious. And so I told all of the middle school boys, I said, you guys, let's all of you guys should just turn in a resume and see, what happens. And we had a good laugh about it, and we moved on. Well, I got a call about 3 days later from the mom. And she said, "Why are you laughing at my son and making fun of my son?" And I said, No, I wasn't laughing at your son. He made a great joke, and so I thought it was funny. And she said, "He's not joking. He's applying for the job." And I said, "Your 13-year-old son? Are we talking about the same?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "What do you feel about this?" It's so awkward, that conversation. I said, "What do you think about that?" And she quoted the scriptures to me, and she said, "The Bible says that he can do all things through Christ who gives him strength." And I said, "Except for that." I told her, he can't even work at Chick-fil-A, okay? He's not even allowed to work there, much less get a job at a large church leading the staff and the congregation there. Well, she got mad and she hung up, and he applied for the job. And he turned it into the elders, and the elders, they gave him an interview. But, if you're wondering, he did not get that job. But something else happened, which, brings me down a little bit to not laugh so much about it, I guess, is I also applied for that job. And I didn't get it either. So it's a silly story about wanting something that it's just not the right time for, right? Maybe he will end up being a pastor someday, and I wish him well, and maybe he will. But at 13 years old, it's not the right time. It might be the right thing, but it's not the right time. What happens when God's timeline isn't your timeline? That's the next hard question in Habakkuk. What happens whenever you want a job and you're told no? Has that ever happened to you? Maybe you wanted to have a child and you didn't get pregnant. Maybe you wanted to further your career, but you just seem stuck right now and nothing seems to be moving at all for you. What do you do when God's timeline isn't your timeline? Now, remember, we're in Habakkuk. And so if you have your Bibles, I want you to turn to Habakkuk. And you got to remember how this whole thing started out. Habakkuk says in chapter 1, verse 2, do you guys remember it? Go here with me. Habakkuk 1:2, he says this, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save?" I think in general, we are much more in a hurry than what God is. Do you agree with that? I think that is true. And here is Habakkuk at the very first sentence that he says is, "How long, Lord, am I going to pray and pray and pray about this, and you don't seem to be doing anything? How long are you going to wait?" Basically, Habakkuk is upset. And it seems like God's not doing anything. And then, of course, if you were here last week, God responds. And he finally does respond, and that's a positive, right? God responds, but not in the way that he expected or that he wanted. And God says, don't worry, I'm doing something. I'm bringing the Babylonians down to take over the earth. And Habakkuk says, maybe we could go back to the part where you're not doing anything. That would be better than what you just said. And he has a reaction, and he has a second complaint, and he says, God, how is that better? How is that better than not doing anything? In other words, he says, you're letting the bad guys win. And so after this second complaint, Habakkuk says something that gives him a nickname. And so Habakkuk has a nickname, and it's because of what he says in chapter 2, verse 1. Have you ever got a nickname from something that you said, right? That's something that stuck with you, and maybe you wish that people would just forget about it, right? Well, my best friend growing up, his name was Jonas Walls, and there was a group of us that hang out, and Jonas said one day something that he never lived down. Even to this day, we still text him, and we call him by this name. And he said to us, hey guys, what was the name of that spider in Charlotte's Web? Charlotte? Is that what you're talking about? Well, from that day, we couldn't call him Charlotte, so we called him the pig's name. So to this day, we call him Wilbur because of that. Some people don't even know his name. They think it's Wilbur. Well, Habakkuk gets a nickname right here. So look at chapter 2, verse 1. Look at what happens. So Habakkuk says, after this second complaint, he says, God, how is this better? He said, you're letting a violent and an evil people swallow up a people more righteous than themselves. How is that good? And so look in chapter 2, verse 1, and look what he says. He says, I will stand at my watch. I'm going to stay right here, okay? I'm going to stay right here. I want to know. I want to hear from you. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the what? What's it say? The ramparts. Another word for that is watchtower, depending on your translation, right? Watchtower, kind of the same word there. And he says, I will look to see what he will say to me. He said, I'm waiting. You got to answer me on this. This is not a question that I'm just asking and then walking away. And he says, and what answer I am to give to this complaint. And that's where he gets the nickname right here. Habakkuk has the nickname, the prophet on the watchtower, or the watchtower prophet, right? And here's a picture of a watchtower from that time. And so Habakkuk says, man, look, I'm just going to station myself right here. I need to know. I don't understand what you're doing here, God. And I love this response. I think it's a fantastic response by Habakkuk. Because Habakkuk isn't just dropping grenades on God and then just walking away. He's not lobbing bombs and trying to call God bad names and then just walk away. Here. He genuinely wants to know what God has to say. I mean, when you were a teenager, did you get along with your parents all the time? Did you have some friction with your parents? I know I did, right? Did you ever drop a grenade or say something mean or scathing and then just kind of walk away real quick? How did that work out for you, right? Well, Habakkuk, he has the chance to do that, but he does not do that. He doesn't just complain and walk away. He waits for God to respond. And here is the two things that he can't figure this out in his mind. He can't figure out this. Number one, how can faithful people believe if you destroy them? How can they believe if you destroy the temple? How does this work? And number two, here's the second question he asks, is what about your reputation, God? We're your people. How can the reputation of God stand if you let bad things happen to good people? Guys, those are questions. I love Habakkuk. Aren't you guys just with me in this? That Habakkuk is asking questions that we all ask. And here we are. This is his questions. And Habakkuk wants to know for himself. He wants to understand this for himself. But what is Habakkuk? He's a preacher. He's a prophet. And so he has to get this word from the Lord. And then what does he have to do? He has to preach this. So he says, I got to know not only for myself, but I've got to give an answer to this complaint. Because when I turn around and tell people, they're going to have some questions too. And how's that going to go? Habakkuk is going to say, okay, guys, gather up. I got a word from the Lord. Oh, really? That's great. Fantastic. What's the man upstairs have to say for us? Well, I don't know how to say this, but he says hi. And you remember Babylon? Oh, gosh. Boo. Yeah. Well, and they're asking, is he going to destroy Babylon? Not quite. He's going to use Babylon to destroy you. All right. Did we pass offering yet? Okay, let's get out of here. I mean, that is not going to be easy for Habakkuk to deliver that news. And so he stands there like a watchman, not like a pestilent child, but like somebody who wants to hear from God. And then comes verse 2. Look at Habakkuk 2:2. Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on, look at the word, tablets, so that a herald may run with it. What's he saying right there? Make it plain on the tablets. He's saying, I've decided. This is happening. You can take it to the bank, write it in stone. This is happening, unfortunately. And then look at verse 3. He says this, for the revelation awaits an appointed time. That's so important. Hang on to that. An appointed time. It speaks of the end. We'll talk about that. And will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come, and it will not delay. God right now is addressing the timing, his timing. You remember Habakkuk starts out and is complaining about God's timing, and God finally addresses the timing. And he tells Habakkuk, there is an appointed time for this. God's timing was not random. There was a purpose to his timing. But right here is where it shifts gears to finally a little bit more positive here. And it says it speaks of the what? The end. And so what is he saying? The end of what? He's talking about the end of their suffering. He's talking about the end of Babylon here. It's a positive thing. This series has been somber as we look into Habakkuk, and we've looked at the hard questions that Habakkuk is asking God, and finally, right here, it finally takes a more positive turn, and that's great news. But, there's a big but here, okay? It's not going to seem like it comes soon enough. He says, look at what he says, though it linger, right? Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come, and it will not delay. What God told Habakkuk that day is the same thing that echoes to us today, is that suffering, it never ends as quickly as we want it to. Am I right about that? But God is aware. Think about that in your own life. I think about that in my own life. God is aware of your suffering, and it is for a purpose. We do not suffer pointlessly. God knows and will always, I stress that word always because it's in the scriptures, always uses your suffering to shape us into better people. Now, how we respond to that will be different sometimes. There was an influential pastor. Do you guys know of J. Vernon McGee? Have you ever read his stuff or heard of him? He told about his father's death and how he struggled to understand it. He was just a boy. He wrote this in a commentary about Habakkuk. He said this: "My father had been killed in an accident at a cotton gin. And he said, after the funeral service was over and everybody had gone, I rode my bicycle back to his grave. He said, I sat there and I wept and I cried at the gravesite. And he said, I cried out to God, why, oh God, did you take him?" And it just break your heart to see a little boy. Imagine him riding his bike back to the grave. Why did you do this, God? He says, time has gone by, and today I have an answer for that. I'll pause right there and say, sometimes we don't get an answer, do we? Not in this lifetime, but he says here, he has an answer. And he says, I know now that it was God's method of dealing with a boy who would never have entered the ministry otherwise. Listen, in the moment of our suffering, it might feel like our struggles are going to continue on, how long? Forever. That's how we see it. But here God tells Habakkuk that even though it seems like the good days will never come, keep faith, keep trusting. Better days will come. Why? Because of the formation that happened in us in the hard days. It will get better. And then he says, there are two roads from here. When you go through suffering, there are two roads out of suffering. And God highlights those next. Look in verse 4. He says, see, the enemy, and he's going to start talking about Babylon now, right? He started talking about Babylon. He says, see, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright. But the righteous, now he's going to talk about God's people, his own people. It says the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. And then he goes back to Babylon. He says, indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and is never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the people. Hey guys, you remember that poem? It was by Robert Frost, and it was the road less traveled. You guys remember that poem? A lot of us had to memorize that in high school, right? Well, in that poem, Robert Frost, he says that there were two roads that led into the wood. And he looks at the two roads, and he is only one person, so he can only travel one. So he travels down the one, but he always wondered what the other path might have been like. And he gets to the end, and he kind of thinks about it. We've done that, right? In our decisions, we all chose a path, and we've all thought, like, I wonder if I would have chose this. I wonder what would happen. In his poem, both paths are positive paths. And he just wonders what would have happened. In this right here, in Habakkuk chapter 2, you have two paths, and one is good and one is bad. There is one road that is easy, but it will lead to death. And there is one road that is hard, but it will lead to life. And he lays those out for us there. And he is calling his people to live by faith. But he says the Babylonians live by arrogance, by a lack of self-control, and greed. Guys, isn't those things the natural path, the natural road for all of us? Absolutely. A lack of self-control, greed, right? Arrogance. Those are natural things. We have to intentionally turn ourselves off of that path. If you don't intentionally turn your direction, you will go down that path, because that is what is in our DNA. That is what is natural to us. And he says, if you go down that road, it will be great for a while, but it will lead to death. This idea that he says, the righteous person will live by his faithfulness, that verse, that one little line, becomes a pillar, like a foundation on which the New Testament theology is built. Can I show you something? Watch this. Paul when he writes all of his letters in the New Testament, this one little sentence is a foundational piece for him. In Romans chapter 1, verse 17, he writes this. He says this, for the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith, from first to last, just as it is written. Where do you think it is written? In Habakkuk, he says, the righteous will live by faith. He starts the whole book of Romans in chapter 1, verse 17. That is the foundation verse for the whole book of Romans. It all stands on 117. Boom, right from Habakkuk, right there. Then he does it again, this time in Galatians chapter 3. Look in Galatians chapter 3, verse 11. It says this, clearly, no one who relies on the law is justified before God because, and then he quotes, the righteous will live by what? Faith. He then again quotes this one little sentence. We're not sure who wrote Hebrews, but Hebrews quotes this again in Hebrews chapter 10, look at verse 37. He says this, for in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. And then he goes and he says in verse 38, but my righteous one will live by faith. Can you believe that this one little book, this one little line in this little book has so much punching power for the New Testament theology in which the New Testament gospel is built on? It's right here. The righteous will live by faith, and the evil will live by greed, by arrogance, by pride. There are two paths, and we must choose. And it hasn't changed all these years later. Here's the point. Here's the point. Your decisions today determine your destination tomorrow. It's not rocket science, but it is true, isn't it? Your decisions today determine your destination tomorrow. It's called the principle of the path. It shows up in every area of our lives. I have two friends. Financially, they chose different paths. One friend, in his 20s, was very responsible with his finances. And so he wanted to save 10% every month from his check. He wanted to tithe 10% from his check. And then he wanted to invest 10%. And then he wanted to live on 70. And some of us are like, sounds nice. There's no way I could have afforded to do that. He couldn't either. He ate rice and beans. He did not go on vacations. He did not do that. And like I said, that's not for everybody, but he did it. And now that he's approaching his 50s, he is not worried about retirement. He's not living paycheck to paycheck. The other friend of mine, they spent everything they got, everything they earned, and they never saved. They went on these vacations. They furnished their home. They did all these things, right? And they are the same age as us and in our friend group, and they are nervous. They are worried about retirement because whenever you get to my age and you haven't thought about that yet and you think, oh gosh, it's the principle of the path. You look at that in every single area of your life. In youth ministry, you guys are getting tired of me saying this, but I used to say in youth ministry all the time, right? Show me your friends and I will show you your what? Thank you. Future. Your decisions about your friends will be everything to you in your life. Well, in adult ministry, it's a little bit different, isn't it? It's this. Show me your credit card bill and I will show you your future. Because what you spend your money on determines your priorities. And your priorities today will determine your destination tomorrow. God is saying to Habakkuk, Babylon will look successful for a time, but they will fall. And he's saying also, you will suffer for a time, but you will rise. the path that God is calling His people to walk is the path of faithful suffering. If they walk that path, it will produce fruit. And we get to choose that road. We get to choose what decisions we make. And no matter which road you choose, God says in the end, skip all the way down to verse 20, Habakkuk 2:20. He says, there will be no defense, no excuses, and no boasting at the end of it. He says, the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before Him. Look, the world may look like Babylon is winning. In your world, it may seem like God is late. But ultimately, God is still on the throne, and every knee shall bow, and every tongue will confess that He is Lord. So, what do we do with this? What do we do whenever God's timing doesn't seem to be our timing? What do we do when God seems late? It's just this. Number one, post yourself to listen. Just like Habakkuk said, I will post myself on this watchtower. We post ourselves to listen. We bring our requests to God, and then we what? We look for Him. Real faith, hear this, real faith is being bold enough to ask and then strong enough to stay. That's real faith. If you've got hard questions for God, bring them to the tower. God wants you to ask those questions. Bring them to the tower. Standing at your watch, when it says, I'm going to stand at my watch, here's what that means for us. Here's exactly what that means. It means we ask those hard questions and then we sit down and we have a time, we have a place, and we have a plan. A time, place, and plan. We get into the Word every day. We have a time of prayer. And a lot of us, we want to have those things, don't we? But then we look and we say, why am I so inconsistent with my quiet time with the Lord? I want to tell you something. Here's the secret sauce. Pick a time, pick a place, and have a plan. And if you have those three things, I promise you, you'll build regularity in connecting with the Lord. And you will station yourself on the ramparts, and you will be able to ask those questions and hear from the Lord. Sometimes it means just turning off the noise. No phone, no music, just an open Bible and an open heart. And number two is this: trust God's timing, not ours. God said to Habakkuk, though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come. It will come. Better days will come. God's promises are not delayed. They're scheduled. Right? Waiting is a part of God's strategy. It's not His failure. Wait on God. God is never late. So trust God's timing, not yours. And then this, trust God's judgment, not yours. When we go through hard times, everything in us wants to say, if I were God, I would do it differently. But this section of Habakkuk is a warning that I am not God. And I don't see everything the way that God sees it. I don't see the whole picture. Remember that God sees what you cannot. Habakkuk thought Babylon was the problem. And God says, no, I'm using Habakkuk as a tool. What felt chaotic was calculated. And what felt delayed was design. Faith means believing that God knows what He's doing, even when you don't understand what He's doing. Last week, we showed the first part of Ashley Posey's testimony. If you were here last week, you saw that. And she talked about how her and her husband, Ryan, wanted desperately to have a child, but it just wasn't happening for them. And when they finally did get pregnant, the baby died. And her testimony was a powerful example of faithfulness during the hard times in life. But many people came up to me afterwards and said, and asked, well, what happened? Did she ever eventually have kids? What happened? Well, check out part 2 of her story.
So when we left off in the story, Mother's Day of 2008, Ryan and I had been praying about our next step to take in trying to get pregnant, and our doctor at that time was like, you have basically one more option left, and that's to do IVF, which is in vitro fertilization. So we started that at the end of May 2008. And I was absolutely convinced that it did not work. I mean, I would have bet $1 million that we were not pregnant at the end of this. And if you know anything about IVF, it's extremely physically demanding, financially, emotionally, just everything. It's very stressful. And I didn't think it worked. And also, call my husband with the results, because I just can't even hear it. Like, I didn't think I was pregnant. And I went to have lunch with my mom and my sister in the city, and just trying to like distract myself and not even think about it. And Ryan called while I was sitting at lunch with them and said, "You're not gonna believe it. I hope you're sitting down. You're pregnant, and the numbers are like amazing, and everything's great." And so I just collapsed like into tears, and so excited and just elated that, you know, after 2 years we had this miracle baby. And so in September of 2008, a few months later, we found out we were having a little boy, which that timing was really special to me because it was basically a year to the day that we had had a miscarriage the year before. And so God really did turn our mourning into dancing, and it was a really special time. So in February of 2009, we had Bennett Ryan Posey was born, and just totally has been such a blessing to us. And when I look back now at that season of infertility, I know me, I know my impatience, I know my pride, and just my heart at that time. And I don't think I would have given God all the glory for that. Like, if we had gotten pregnant super quickly, I think I would have been like, oh, I made this plan and it happened, and yay, you know, look what we did. But after all of that, and just the way that God weaved that story together, there's no way that I could have any response but to say, God, you did this 100%. This is a miracle straight from you. And my favorite part of our infertility journey is that when Bennett was 18 months old, we started trying to get pregnant for baby number 2, and in 2 months we got pregnant on our own without any doctors or anything, which was such a obvious change from the first time. And so our daughter Vivian was born in May of 2011, and just for me, like, when I look back through scripture, God often would call people to build a memorial or to build a monument as like a remembrance of his faithfulness. And so for me, Bennett and Vivian are just such a tangible reminder to me of his faithfulness in my life. And I'm so grateful for the maturing and how it developed me spiritually, and how it just strengthened me and my trust in the Lord. And so I'm ultimately so grateful, and God's story in this experience of my life was just so much better. It's such a better story than I could have ever written.
I absolutely love that story. And can I just repeat one paragraph that she said there? She said, when I look back now at the season of infertility, she said, I just know me. I know my impatience. I know my pride and just my heart at that time. She said, I don't think I would have given God all the glory for that. If we had gotten pregnant quickly, I would have thought, oh, I made this plan and I made it happen. Look at what we did. But after all that, and just the way that God weaved this story together, there's no way that I could have any response but to say, God, you did this 100%. This is a miracle straight from you. Guys, what if God's timing is actually better than our timing? Listen, when in doubt, trust Him. When in doubt, stay faithful. When in doubt, learn to lean into His timing, His plan for your life. Though it linger, it will certainly come. It will not delay. Let me pray.